we'll do the backup plan. Come on.
Something that doesn't carry live.
All right, that looks, I mean, we're getting a sound monitor.
Yeah, that's.
We can hear something? Okay. Well, we'll go with that.
Wow.
Well, good. At least we saved the broadcast. We're going to get an infinite echo. Oh, and there's my platypus. And now she says it's good. Okay. Right. Question. Who do you blame? Right. We all know what the ultimate end state is going to be, which is Joseph sold off to slavery. And I'm sorry if I just gave the spoiler. But I'm pretty sure looking around the room, you've all read this book at least once before. So Joseph is going to be sold off to slavery. So the question is, who do you blame for that? Right? Who is responsible for that result? And what are we going to do with it? Okay, so in order to understand who's responsible, we've got to actually read. We got to read what's happening. Okay, so we are on Vayeishev, chapter 37, chapter 1, and page 226 if you are in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. 226. All right, we ready? And as we go through, if you notice anything odd about the phrasing, feel free to either speak up, or if you're too timid, at least put your hand up, and I will do the same to try and point out some oddities, just so that we're being more carefully aware of how this story is being constructed. Because we don't have a lot of sentences, probably a good 30 pages if we were reading a modern novel. Instead, we've got very few verses. So notice the way that it is crafted to give more information than you might think when you first read it.
Now, Jacob was settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This then is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers.
Pause. All right, so first of all, again, which is even more obvious in the Hebrew, which is, Ela Toldot Yaakov. These are the generations of Yaakov. The next word in Hebrew is Yosef. They work out the prepositional phrase regarding how old Joseph is. Right. But it really literally goes, this is the line of Jacob, Joseph.
And none of his other brothers are mentioned.
Thank you. Okay, so right from the beginning, that Joseph is being mentioned as the line of Jacob, right? The Toldot, the generations of Jacob. And we are being told about Joseph. And everyone else is missing. Right? So that should alert us already that the Torah is trying to draw something to our attention. What they're trying to draw, we'll come back to in our debate. Okay, onward.
So at 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. And Joseph...
But you're letting that pass.
Where's Leah? Yeah, where's
right?
Leah?
So where are the sons of Leah?
Yeah, Leah.
Right? Why is he hanging out with the
maidservants,
with the children from the maidservant rather than the children from Leah? What's going on here? Keep going.
And Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father. Now,
well, we got a good groan on that, so that perhaps is not something that we are going to approve of. Okay, but make sure we got that.
Now, Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons.
Didn't he love his wife Rachel more than Leah?
He absolutely loved Rachel more than Leah, and now he's also
root of some problems, perhaps.
And we also saw some unequal distribution of love in Jacob's own life, meaning that Jacob also had Isaac loving one and Rivka loving the other, and we saw how well that worked out between Jacob and Esau. Issues in the modern term. It creates issues, or what we used to call problems. It used to call problems. So we're going to have some issues here, maybe, from Jacob loving one son best of all. All right.
I would have thought things would have changed from back in the days when Cain and Abel were offering sacrifices to God, and God liked Abel's sacrifices better and saw that that's what happens when you do that. One brother kills the other because he feels less. I would have thought that there would have already been a learning experience, but maybe we're slow in learning.
Yes, because nowadays we're all perfect. We don't get jealous of each other at all.
That's right.
Brothers and sisters always live in harmony. No one is ever resentful. No parents ever.
Says, Mother loved you more.
Never. The sentence is so foreign to us. right? It's no parent ever actually shows favoritism. Ever? No, of course not. Right. So perhaps it's not a question of learning; it's a question of being human and learning how to deal with our humanity. So this story should feel very familiar to us. We would like to perhaps imagine, but that he might have learned from all the examples in the prior stories, but he has to make his own mistakes and learn from them as well.
And I guess we do too.
Or perhaps they're not a mistake. Perhaps Joseph really is deserving. Right? Maybe that is just simply the fact. The room, would people be uncomfortable with the parent showing a preference for one child over the other?
Yes.
Oh, really? So you were all very upset when Isaac was the primary inheritor of Abraham rather than Ishmael. The land of Israel should have been divided between Isaac and Ishmael evenly. It didn't matter what Sarah said. It didn't matter what God said. There shouldn't have been any favoritism. Right? And Jacob and Esau, right? Esau, despite being what we believe to have been an impulsive, impetuous, and violently inclined person, he should have received absolutely the same, if not more, being the firstborn, than what Jacob received.
Or David should never have been crowned king because he had all these older brothers who were.
Right. Right. And God certainly should never praise any individual for their accomplishments, their achievements, their greatness, their goodness. Everyone should always be treated exactly the same. But most of us, when we come down to it, if you're trying to decide which one of my kids is going to take over the family business, you're probably going to make some judgment calls in that. Or if you're wondering which one of my children am I going to make my primary medical directive person, you're going to be making some judgment calls. That doesn't mean, however, that you love one more than the other. So perhaps what's bothering us here is not that Jacob is making judgment calls, but that he is loving one more than the other. And perhaps what's also bothering us is what's going to come next, which is his justification for loving Joseph more than the others, which is where I cut you off at the end of verse 3.
Loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was the child of his old age, and he had made him an ornamented tunic.
All right. Vein sikunim, right? The child of his old age. This gives him preferential status. Why?
People nature, human nature.
Okay, so human nature, but I thought human nature was to love your firstborn most. Baby of the family who gets babied. Or perhaps it is.
Yes.
What's that?
Wasn't Rachel?
Rachel was Joseph's
So
mother.
Joseph is the firstborn of Rachel.
He is the firstborn of Rachel, indeed. And also Benjamin, who is the other born of Rachel. There is a more ambivalent feeling in Jacob's heart because Rachel dies when Benjamin is born. And so there's a feeling of looking at Benjamin and seeing the death of Rachel, which might be why he has transferred all of his affection towards Joseph. Joseph for Joseph, or is he loving Joseph as a reflection of Rachel? In which case, is Joseph really coming out ahead? Imagine most of us want to be loved for ourselves, not loved because we remind somebody of someone else.
That reminds me of a Mishnah that you actually gave us a class on as to, according to the Torah, how you need to treat your children and the second wife and how that's handled. So it reminded me of that.
Yes, the Torah later on is really clear that he needed to treat them according to the law, not according to his heart. And that is codified into Jewish law for later inheritance issues. In humans, there are ways to still treat people differently. The question is, why would he treat them differently? And is that, to go back to our big question, does that mean that the main person we're going to be blaming for all of these problems is Jacob? The root of all of these problems? Hold that. We'll keep going.
And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of his brothers, they hated him so that they could not speak a friendly word to him.
All right, and remember the word friendly words here is the word shalom. Right? They couldn't even speak to him in peace. Right? It's more than just friendly in the English sense of the word. It's shalom. Right? There is nothing harmonious, nothing complete, nothing whole, nothing peaceful about the relationship between them. And that's a rough place to be in a family dynamic. All right, onward.
Once Joseph had a dream which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, when suddenly my sheaves stood up and remained upright, and then your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaves." His brothers answered, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams.
Okay. So does Joseph have any part of the blame?
You can either think of Joseph as being totally detached, that he
Clueless?
doesn't, clueless, think, what a stuck up.
But on the other hand, if he
Arrogant.
believed, right,
Yeah.
but if he believed his dream was a true revelation,
Which, as we learned, it is.
which as we learned exactly it is, why would he have to keep his mouth shut? Right? I mean, if he had dreamed to them and said, "I dreamed that one day you would come to me and I would heal your wounds," meaning I'm going to be a doctor, is that wrong? Right? Why can't he share that? Right? So they're going to bow. Somebody in the family has to be the leader. So it's okay for Reuben to be the leader because he was the firstborn, but it'd be wrong for Jacob to be the leader, Joseph to be the leader. Right? Well, what's wrong with sharing his dream that in fact things are going to be a little different? I mean, after all, there's a family tradition of not going with the firstborn.
There's also the imagery with the agricultural images.
Mhm.
We can look back at it from our perspective and say there's going to be a shepherding.
Right.
There's about to be a change.
Right. There's definitely a bit of foreshadowing of.
There's a change, and God doesn't let anything happen without first somehow revealing it.
Right. Although most
We may not
semi-nomadic.
like it, but this is a new opportunity, not necessarily a new problem.
Not 100%. I mean, most semi-nomadic peoples did have light agricultural work as well that supplemented their shepherding, the pastoralness. But it definitely seems like there's a shift here. But notice that his dreams are about himself, right? I mean, he's dreaming about himself, which is, by the way, a very interesting contrast to what we see of Joseph later on. Where not that he's not dreaming about himself, but he is interpreting others' dreams for them, right? Rather than interpreting his own dreams for himself. So there is a big shift in him later on that may imply lacking at this time in his life when he was 17. Because we all know that 17-year-olds are full of wisdom and know how to handle life perfectly.
Or maybe,
or at least they think they do.
Or maybe this is foreshadowing the fact that Joseph has a special relationship with dreams, with his own, this is an odd dream to have, that everybody's bound to him, so that in the future he can also figure out dreams. It's a foreshadowing of what would happen.
It is definitely a foreshadowing, as well as a compare and contrast moment.
Yeah.
All right, onward.
He dreamed another dream, brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and brothers, his father berated him. "What?" he said to him. "What is this dream you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground?" So his brothers were wrought up at him, and his father kept the matter in mind.
Okay, so dream number 2, sun, moon, and 11 stars. Them being, of course, the 11 stars are the 11 brothers. The sun and the moon would be mom and dad. Now, mom's already gone, and that's a whole other argument about what it is to have dreams and whether dreams sometimes have erroneous pieces within them. But dad got the message here that not only is he going to be in charge, Joseph, but that apparently he'll be in charge even over dad, which is perhaps even more shocking than the idea that he might be in charge over the 11. And Jacob's response to this bit of news is, well, he gives him a gentle rebuke, and then he keeps the matter in mind. I'll keep an eye on this.
This dream he does tell to his father. The first dream with the sheaves of wheat, he did not tell.
Not
his father,
explicitly, correct.
but he tells it to the people who are in his dream.
Mm-hmm. Right. You know, because he's just sharing what he saw.
Yeah, he shared.
Right? I looked out the window. This is what I saw. Why are you? Don't shoot the messenger. Right? I'm just telling you what I saw.
And at night I dream about you.
Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? I mean, you're a little bit lower, but I still dream about you. It's, yeah. So on the blame game, right? How are we handling this, right? We basically got two people that we've talked about a lot. We've got Jacob and his treatment of Joseph and the other brothers. But we've also got now Joseph in the midst of his own complicity in alienating his family. But there's somebody else that's missing from the list, yes? What?
Brothers.
The brothers!
Oh.
Okay, thank you. Right, maybe the people who actually throw him in the pit are perhaps partly to blame for him being thrown in the pit. You know, maybe there may be extenuating circumstances, there may be things that that have led into this, but they are the ones who put their hands on him and deal with him as they do. But the question is, are they simply reacting to the sum total of, make it math, of Jacob and Joseph's behavior, or are they adding their own decisions into the mix? Are they nothing more than automatons, robots that are just carrying out what they have been programmed to do because of how Jacob and Joseph have acted? Or is it, you know, take away that, or is it more like that equals Egypt, right? Are they all complicit, or were really only one of them complicit? So in order to get into some of those answers, we've got some commentary. Now you can read about the actual crime if you keep reading on in the parasha, and it is an amazing story of how they deal with their brother's problem.
Joseph is 17.
Joseph is 17.
Everybody knows what 17 is. The brothers certainly did not. When it came to me, their maturity, they were grown men, 40s, 50s in some cases.
Perhaps. I mean, we're not 100% sure.
30s and 40s.
Yeah, these 30s.
Probably 30s. Remember, there were 7 years out of the 20-some that they were living in, that Jacob was living in Haran. There were 7 years that he was wifeless. And so that leaves us with about 14 years. And with Joseph being born at the end of the Haran's day, that means that the oldest brother could be would be 31. 12 were all, or the 11 were all being born fairly bing bang boom. So some of them would probably have been only 1 or 2 years older than Joseph. So
Disregard all that effort. Hello.
But they also
Because, you know, men that age will be 17.
a 30-year-old is just as liable for their behavior as a 7, or just as non-responsible for their behavior. At what point does responsibility kick in?
Yeah.
60. When you get your AARP card, right? Now you're a responsible, mature person. Yes.
That's probably true.
Right, and you get the discounts. Yes. Okay.
One time I remember, maybe it was a year ago.
Could be.
We were reading this, and there was the same talk about the brothers.
Right.
Joseph had a favorite with the brothers that were not from Leah.
From Bilhah and Silva. Right. We
Yeah.
mentioned it actually just before you came in this morning as well. But it's also going to come up in our commentary. So hold on to that thought. All right. So let's take a look at the information that can help us figure out Jacob's complicity.
The Torah regards all Jacob's sons as secondary to Joseph, for the whole purpose of Jacob in working for Laban was only for Rachel, Joseph's mother, who were born only in consequence of this.
All right. So remember how I said that in that first line it says Ila Toldot Yaakov, Yosef, right? We act like Joseph is all of them. Rashi explains that's because purpose, right? He wanted to marry Rachel. And by wanting to marry Rachel, Joseph was therefore in the cards. All the other kids, with the possible exception of Benjamin, but certainly all the other kids born from anyone else, they were leftovers. Right? They were accidents. They were extraneous. If he could have had Rachel first and only had Joseph, Jacob would have felt fulfilled and content.
Diana.
Right, Diana, exactly. How does that make you feel if you're one of the other brothers? Right? You guys were just what I did, waiting around, born.
I had to, you know, put up with.
I gotta kill time, and I had to, do my husbandly duties to Leah, and then there was this whole thing with your mom about, having this surrogate, but really, it was all about your mom, and with your mom, that meant it was all about Joseph. You're second fiddle, or third or fourth, or like not even on the stage. Yeah. You were practice attempts, right? I was just getting it right until I could be with Rachel and have Joseph. Beautiful way to look at a family. But that was something that we can see from Rashi's basing this on exactly the way that Jacob responded and behaved. That it was very clear that Leah was not loved in any way, shape, or form the way that Rachel was loved. And it's very clear that Leah was hoping desperately that each of her children would endear Jacob to her. And it didn't happen. So how does that then leave the children born to Leah feeling both when their father doesn't love their mother more because they have been born, and their mother perhaps only saw in them as an attempt to get the love of the husband that she lacked? Mom and dad didn't love us for us. They loved, they wanted us, or she wanted us only as a tool for him, and he could care less about.
Wow.
Yeah, grow up with that. The godchild comes along, Joseph, right? And how you're going to feel. That's rough. All right, but let's go to that coat, which also seems to get so much attention. As being the multicolored coat. You'll notice, by the way, in the text, it never said multicolored. That is a midrash. So there are other interpretations of what the pasim means.
Pasim is a term for raiment of fine wool.
Based on the Talmud.
Similar is fine linen and blue,
which comes in the book of Esther. The same word is almost the same word is used in the book of Esther.
The same garment is mentioned in the story of Amnon and Tamar, and we may therefore gather that it was made of very fine material.
Right, and that is exactly the same word. The katona pasim is used in the story of Amnon and Tamar, another heartbreaking family story, where the half brother rapes his half sister. Just really, really painful. But the basic idea here is that this garment is not just a decorative garment. This garment is a status garment, which is what Seforno tries to make clear in his next comment.
The coat was a visible sign that Joseph was intended by him to become the leader of all the brothers, both at home and in the field. The use of such distinctive clothing to symbolize someone's elevated stature is also found in Isaiah, where it says, I will dress him, that is Shilkiah, in your tunic, where it signals that authority is transferred to the one wearing the appropriate garments. The Talmud Baba Kama also confirms that authority is signaled by the attire worn by the people possessing it. Jacob,
right. So clothes are a symbol more than just of a fancy coat. I mean, we can imagine the resentment and jealousy if one kid gets the designer clothes and the other kids get the goodwill. Imagine that the designer clothes is not just, expensive or nicer, but the designer clothes come with it a certain status or rank within the family. It makes the hurt even more palpable.
This also foreshadows the high priest garments.
The high priest garments as well. It's also, by the way, the compare and contrast of what's going to happen when the coat is stripped from him. Remember, when they strip the coat from him, they're saying, let us see what happens to his dreams now. If his dreams were about ruling over them and the coat was a symbol of his rulership, after all, he had just been sent to go check on his brothers as though he was their supervisor, then for the coat to be stripped of him is stripping of him of his status, not just his status as favorite, but his status as of authority. And then what happens to him when he's with Mrs. Potiphar? Again, clothes are being removed. What happens to him when he is being elevated in Pharaoh's house? Clothes are being added, right? So it is all about the clothes when it comes to the Joseph story. This is not just a All right, so let's see if what Storma can be even more straightforward about Jacob's complicity.
Jacob had committed an error, allowing the love in his heart for Joseph visible through preferential treatment of him.
All right. What Sforno says here that's so interesting is he doesn't say the problem with Jacob is that he loved one more than the other. All right, what's the problem?
The problem is she makes it obvious.
Yeah.
So visible.
Exactly, that it was visible. When I meet with families for funerals, the kids will often joke and say, well, you know, mom always loved you best, or dad always loved you best. But usually, they're sort of saying it with a bit of a smile, and usually they disagree about who was loved best. That's when I'm a little worried.
Yeah.
All right, when everyone says, well, you know, mom loved him best, and the him
Everybody
says,
does.
yes,
Yeah.
she did. That's when you know that whatever may or may not have been in the parent's heart reached a level of obviousness that became undeniable, even among sibling rivalry. Then that becomes a very corrosive influence. And that's what Sforno is saying here very astutely, is that we're not judging Jacob for loving, right? You know, love is a fickle thing. And I mean, after all, he had difficulty with loving his wife. Why would we not expect it to be difficulty with his kids? But when you're a parent in particular, you have a responsibility to make sure you restrain how you feel from being seen by those that you are interacting with, because it's not fair to the kids.
Year after year, hard to believe that Jacob really didn't see this. And he sent Joseph out there again, away from home to Shechem, to supervise his brothers when he should have known that this was going to be a disaster.
You mean if he's already seeing the tension building among them, why would you send him away from your vision, away from your supervision?
Yeah, not just out the back door to see how they're doing.
Right, but miles and miles away, days away. It's a good question, right? It's a good question. Now, on the other hand, some commentators, not that it's here, say that that was Jacob's deliberate attempt to send Joseph in order to effect a reconciliation, trying to get them all together, right? Just get everyone around the table. Let's let them all be together in the field, and then, you know, it's like a road trip, right? It'll heal all wounds.
So bring them all home and sit them around your table.
Come on.
I'm sorry.
No, because then they'll be vying for your attention, so they'll be competing with each other.
Right.
Whereas if you're not there, far away.
Oh, yeah.
Right. The road trip therapy, I mean, it's the core of how many movies?
I've seen a lot of parents that actually do that.
Right.
But I think obviously the most effective is when you sit and you discuss.
Yeah,
You know?
and actually talk about the elephant in the room. Okay, guys, I know that this seems like there's some unfairness in the family, and I see that that's building resentment. We need to air this all out. And since I'm maybe the source of much of that resentment, Jacob, need to be up in this reconciliation. This may be the inverse of what Jacob's pattern has been that we've seen in the past, right? When there is trouble, Jacob runs away, right? Here, Jacob isn't running away, he's sending away, right? If there's a problem that needs to be resolved, best for it to happen a few days away from me.
He could have gone along.
Yeah.
So he is in effect running away by staying
Yes.
home.
Exactly. That's what I mean by the inverse of running,
Advocating responsibility.
is pushing the problem further from you rather than pushing yourself from the problem. Right. So that may be what's happening here. Which, how are we feeling about Jacob? Is he at least partly to blame, would we say? Or is he more than partly to blame? Is he the primary source? You want to look at some of the others?
First source.
All right. Let's check and see what Jacob's role in all this. I mean, after all, he's the victim, right? How could he possibly be responsible?
Joseph fussed with his hair, and he touched up his eyes so he should appear good looking.
All right. So why bother telling us he's a 17-year-old, and then why bother later on when he's in Potiphar's house to talk about how gorgeous he is? If not, that's just the kind of guy he was, right? His appearance, perhaps to distraction. As you know, teenagers often will. When you're the older brothers, maybe that's a little annoying to you. But that might die, though, right?
How long was he in Potiphar's house? I never.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember I don't remember the precise years, or if the precise years are given. It seems to be, yes. All right. However, let's go back to his more his interactions rather than his own personal grooming.
Whenever Joseph saw wrong in his brothers, the sons of Leah, he reported.
Right. So what Rashi's trying to differentiate here, which is going to be argued against in just a few comments, I mentioned that he would give bad reports about his brothers, but also mentioned that he would associate with the brothers from Zilha and Bilhah more, right? Zilpah and Bilhah more. And what Rashi's trying to do here is split that initial verse into saying that he hung out with the maidservant sons and he gave bad reports on the other brothers, on Leah's brothers. And so that's why we have this doubling up here of these brothers like this and those brothers like that. Yes,
But you do. You like some people more than others. You discriminate.
But he discriminated based on his mother and
discriminating based on I like you more than I like her is one thing.
Yeah.
But to discriminate on I like this family, regardless of the individual members, that is getting closer to prejudice, right? When it's not I dislike this individual because of their character, but because this group, and I've not even examined their character, and they could be the finest person ever, and I still don't like them because they're part of the group, becomes a problem. And vice versa, when you like a whole group of people such that you are blind to the failings of any individual, that is also a problem. But why would Bilhah and Zilpah be separated out?
Is there any difference, for example, in inheritance rights between the children of Rachel and Leah and the children of the maidservants?
Technically, no. They all become tribes.
Tribes.
However, social status-wise, we know that in the ancient Near East, who were born through these surrogates usually had a lower status within the family. So why then might Joseph be associating more with the kids of Bilhah and Zilpah than the kids of Leah?
A threat to him, they're less competition.
Right.
And secondly, they might be more likely to bow down to him according to his dream.
They already know they're second rate,
Yeah.
right? They already know they're second rate. So for him to put on airs in front of them, you hang out with people that you can be superior to, because it's just, nicer. Whereas the children of Leah, who were all born before he was, not so much, right? There's a real rivalry there. There's an equal status and therefore a chance to butt heads. But let's go ahead and see a little bit more about why he's doing what he's doing.
Joseph badmouthed his brothers being an adolescent and not as mature as he should have been, or as his intellect made him appear to be. It's enough to realize what the ultimate effect of his bad-mouthing his brothers would turn out to be.
Right, so why tell us that he's 17, says Forno? Because only a 17-year-old would be so stupid. Right. It's that, yes, he's right. It's not just that he was arrogant. He just was.
He's not mature.
He wasn't mature. He lacked wisdom, and he didn't realize that telling his father the truth we're doing, and there's a whole line of midrashim about what they were doing that he was reporting. But all I did was tell the teacher the truth. Why are you calling me a snitch and a weasel and a rat pink and a stool pigeon? And I just said the truth, right? Which which is very similar to him when he is talking about his dreams. All I'm doing is telling you the dream I had, right? It's just don't kill the messenger. It takes a certain naivete to feel that way. And it takes a certain, and this is what I love about this Forno, it also takes a certain perception by others outside to think that you shouldn't have behaved that way, even though normally teenagers do, right? So that's the beautiful twist that Forno puts in here, which is Joseph was so well put together and so smart that people wouldn't assume that he was immature like a regular teenager. They thought that his emotional maturity was equal to his physical and intellectual maturity. When he behaves in this way, they assume it's entirely by choice, not just because he's a kid. And that's a real problem. And it's a real problem that plays out constantly if you work with kids, is every now and then you will meet a kid that completely impresses you. right? Maybe they impress you because they are very physically developed, right? It's the 7-year-old that's already this tall, and they're shaving. And you think of them as being a 12, 13, 14-year-old, and you have to keep reminding yourself they're only 7, they're only 7, they're only 7. Or the kid that is, brilliant in math, or an amazing artist, prodigy, and you have to keep reminding yourself they're just in kindergarten, they're just in kindergarten. They may be good at math, but that doesn't mean that they know emotionally how to handle things. And that is what Sforno is saying and happening here with Joseph and his brothers. Is they looked at him like everyone else did, and they were totally impressed by how physically and intellectually mature he was. And so they assumed that he was emotionally mature as well. And so when he behaved, it was obviously his intention. And therefore they treat him as one who made that decision, as opposed to someone who made that error. The rest is history.
Yeah.
All right, onward.
Joseph told his father, that his brothers, because of unintentional errors, that is, a lack of professional competence, caused him financial losses in his flocks, seeing that at the time they were primarily preoccupied with increasing their material wealth.
Right, we know they were interested in material wealth because when they get a chance to sell him, they jump on it, right, immediately. The idea here is that all Joseph was doing was simply pointing out that there were not good business decisions being made by his brothers, and since that seems to be the primary goal, that should be pointed out, right? I mean, would you be upset if you were the manager, if your underling went to the VP and explained that your decisions were costing the company money?
Yeah, I'd be upset.
But the purpose of the company is to make money, right? I mean, if we're all in this to be successful, then how can you be upset that I simply pointed out your mistakes? Right. That's the fallacy of believing we're all right. That if we really believe we're all in the same boat, then me pointing out that you're pulling your oar wrong is useful, because now we can row better and we'll get where we want to go faster. But if we're not exactly in 100% the same boat and you're still hoping to get ahead of me, then me pointing out your mistake to your superior is going to be problematic. And that's the question of how do you criticize somebody if you're not sure really what your relationship is with the person, which is why tochacha, rebuke, is always supposed to come from love and respect, not just as, did you see what he did? You really have to be with the person, and Joseph seems to miss that.
Another perspective of that is, even if Joseph would have matured enough to understand, not to be a little bit more politically correct on how to handle that situation.
It's by the way, what we call polite.
Polite. Not politically. But then the situation it seemed like this older brothers were still not emotionally there either. You know what I'm saying? They were not ready, they were not mature, it didn't seem like they were there.
Well, if they still view him as a threat,
yeah, then
why would they welcome anything that he did? And that's actually going to be a segue. Oh, and actually, a few more than I thought. Okay, we're going there in a second. So keep thinking about the brothers and their position for when we get to the brother section on the back. But let's keep on Joseph.
If Joseph had stood up for the rights of his half-brothers, the son of Zilpah and Bilhah, we would have expected these 4 brothers to have tried to rescue Joseph from his attackers.
All right, so this is Ramban. And Ramban is actually going to argue against Rashi, which he often does, which is that when it says he was with Bilhah and Zilpah, the brothers, that doesn't mean he was being nice to them. Because if he were being nice to them, they would have been on his side.
Should you argue that they might have been afraid of the sons of Leah? This is hardly likely, considering that there were 4 of them, and that Reuven would most likely side with them in any quarrel.
Right, because he was trying to save Joseph, we know.
And so, of course, would Joseph himself, against 6. Therefore, Joseph must have badmouthed the sons of Zilpah and Bilhah, and that explains why they were hostile toward him.
A profound impact on their sons, and their mothers would have been around the tent and the community, keeping their mouths shut and minding their own business because they were only maids.
Certainly.
To a large extent.
Right.
They would have out of the drama.
Yes, they did not have leadership positions, although Bill is going to come back in to the mix a little bit later on. But that's with Reuben, and that's a whole other story.
And again, but part of why he takes advantage of her, perhaps, is that they would have been quieter, minding their own business. So they're unlike Leah was very much part of the drama.
Yeah, Leah was very active, indeed. Right. So this is trying to say in Rambam that, we can't just say that Joseph was only being antagonistic to the children of Leah. He must have also been antagonistic to Bilhah and Zilpah's kids, because when we get them at the pit and they're making the decision about his life, you don't hear any one of the Bilhah and Zilpah kids going, Joseph's not really that bad. And like I said, they already know their second status, so they're going to have someone in charge of them anyway. Wouldn't you think they would want to support the guy who had been nice to them, right? If it's about picking a leader, yeah, they would have had a good coalition if he had had better relations with them. The fact that they don't seem to stand with them implies that he was not standing with them. He had not been a good brother to them either. So he wasn't good to the sons of Leah. He wasn't good to the other maidservant sons. He wasn't a great brother, at least by our standards and their feelings. And then Sforno goes on to say,
had he been more mature, he would have kept the contents of such a dream to himself.
As all of you said exactly as well, right? What kind of idiot goes around telling his brothers something like this? Right? I mean, I could easily imagine a young kid or even a teenager giving a dream that they thought was cool, and which everyone else thought was so obviously self-serving and arrogant, and he would have done it blissfully unaware. And that doesn't make him stupid. It's just unable to truly empathize and feel what others are feeling. And Joseph seems to have been there, right? He was wrapped up in himself. He was unaware that there was this brewing issue, and he just thought he was a good kid. A good kid. My dad loves me, so why wouldn't they? Not realizing that was kind of the problem. All right, poor Joseph. I'm sorry, we don't have any sympathy for him anymore. Oh dear. Yeah.
Not only did he tell them his dream as something by the way, but he invited them to listen to him tell it by saying, please pay attention. This intensified the hostility of his brothers, as we see immediately by their reaction. Do you plan to rule over us?
He literally calls them together. Right? This is not just talking over breakfast. This is, hey guys, I'll tell you something. What?
Part of it was that he knew it was a divine dream.
Yeah.
Oh.
So when you get excited to hear God speak to you in such a way that you feel you want to share it with everybody.
Right. I mean, he felt this was definitely of a different caliber of dream than I dreamed I was flying and then there was a pony, right? This is a dream that clearly had meaning to him, and he felt was significant and therefore probably divine.
Yeah.
His problem is he couldn't realize that what he was saying was going to be painful for the brothers to hear. Yeah.
Right.
Totally out of touch.
Totally out of touch. All right. So we already said that Jacob seems to be rather complicit in much of this. Joseph, then. Is he on the hook for some of this?
There's a line for
You don't feel guilty about blaming the victim?
No. He's-
A little bit.
But
A little bit.
but when it comes to his brothers and his, you don't hear, we don't get a telling of Joseph saying, Dad, my brothers don't have, a lot of respect for me, I feel.
Dad, cut it out.
Being like a spy or so. I mean, he doesn't seem to ever catch on or, or possibly he liked the.
Or thought he deserved it. I
you
mean,
know.
had a sense of entitlement to his status.
I don't think he has that much sympathy for
But he's a kid. He's still just a kid.
Yeah, I heard this man say until you're 60 years old. I don't know how long you go before you
Get
start
empathy
saying.
for others? I don't find teenagers very empathetic. Sorry.
No,
They're still wrapped up in themselves.
But he's not wicked. He's not.
No.
He doesn't have a history of shedding blood or
Right.
violence or
That's right.
lying. So these are good qualities, but For he is a bit foolish, and that's
Should we put Rachel on the list too? Because if you think about it, Rachel,
Should have
was the
died.
most loved.
Right.
And at the same time, she would actually just made him feel like he was better than everybody else because she was loved. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely,
Yeah,
you know,
it's
her relationship with her sister and her husband would definitely have rubbed off on the relationship among the kids. We saw that clearly in the parasha. But does that mean that we are exonerating the brothers even a little bit for what they did?
No.
Right? How arrogant and obnoxious can your brother be? Or at what point does the arrogance and obnoxiousness of your brother justify you trying to either kill or sell them? He had not done violence against them. He was not a thief. He was not spreading lies or vicious rumors
the
around
other brothers
them.
already had a little taste of
Right.
blood.
Right. He wasn't sleeping with their wives or hurting their children. So we can definitely blame him for being tactless. We can definitely blame him for seemingly being clueless or immature. Does that really mitigate any measure what the brothers did?
No.
You all just changed your mind. You all said he was on the hook a second ago.
No, I mean,
Okay.
there's blame that can go around to everyone in this.
There's a difference between a simpleton and someone who's a fool.
Right. And there's also
the end of Jonah, shall I not have mercy on those who don't know right from wrong? It's
Right.
a simpleton. He's beyond that. He's not quite that.
no.
So there is some responsibility, but not as much as the other parties in this.
Right. So there is a question of causality, which is what I had put in our little equation here of how do we get to Egypt? It's Jacob plus Joseph plus brothers. All of them contributed to that result. And then there's a question of criminality, right, or justice. Of who actually committed a crime? Who would you put in jail? And what I'm trying to put here is that you might say yes, causality-wise, as far as who contributed to the ultimate response and without whom perhaps we would have avoided this exile to Egypt. You might put all of them on the list, but if it came time to bang your gavel on them, I'm guessing that most of you wouldn't pass sentence on Joseph. You wouldn't diminish the brother's sentence. Happen to have these character traits. Right? You would still say no, they're still 100% guilty. I mean, it's similar if I'm dancing around with someone going, neener, 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 you're ugly and you smell bad, and they shoot me. The judge is not going to knock 6 months off that person's sentence. Not going to say, well, wow, he really was obnoxious. You're right. Yeah. Shooting him. You shouldn't have shot him. You shouldn't have shot him. But I understood how you felt. Therefore, we imagine that wouldn't really take place. But we would definitely say that I helped contribute to my own death by needlessly provoking someone. They're still fully responsible and culpable for what they did. But I did play my part in the drama. We have that clear as we dive into the brothers.
Joseph made it his custom to associate with the sons of Bilhah because his brothers slighted them as being sons of a handmaid. Therefore, he fraternized with them.
So even if we accept Ramban's interpretation that he also brought bad reports about the other handmaid kids, we still have to account, says Rashi, for why was the Torah specifically saying he hung out with them? Given by Rashi is because he knew he wasn't really liked by Leah's brothers, and these guys also weren't really liked by the Leah brothers. Therefore, if I'm being picked on and they're being picked on, together, right? The victims of the bully tend to hang out with each other. And this would seem to indicate, therefore, that the Leah's sons were a bit bullyish.
Because Leah would have been jealous. Leah's the first wife.
Yes, and the one with all the first kids.
She's the first wife.
Right.
In her land, should have been married. She was married.
Yep.
She's the wife.
It's straightforward justice, right? That's the way the custom, or eventually in the Torah, the law is meant to work. His first wife, first kids, first choice. Right? They are of primary status. Even if you have that attitude, you're not supposed to mistreat those that are of lesser status, which is what Rashi is saying the sons of Leah did. They mistreated the sons of the handmaidens, and that attracted Joseph to them. Now, he still had his own trouble with them, at least according to Ramban, but it is one mark against the brothers that Joseph wasn't the only person that got picked on most, which in many dynamics we often see, where bullies will pick on a whole group of people, but there will be one that is the real victim, and the other victims will often join in with the bully against the lowest one on the totem pole in order to keep themselves from being lowest on the totem pole. So if Bilhah and Zilpah's kids were being mistreated, going along with Leah's kids as a great way of avoiding being mistreated even worse. And I know I keep using the word kids, but remember, these are all adults.
Said before of adding Rachel to the list. What about adding Leah to the list? Because she should have been talking to the sons to say, you shouldn't bully
Right.
the others. So
Right. I mean, growing up with this dynamic family, all the parents had a huge responsibility of trying to relieve those pressure points in order to make sure that the kids could grow up and be together. But there's one problem with that, which is called scarcity. If you're worried that the kids growing up are going to have to fight for the limited resources of the family, especially with 12 of them, then you really want your kids to fight to be on top of the dog pile. Leah's not really going to go out of her way, nice and share and all of that. It's demand, but it's not it's not a crime. But it is part of the responsibility, right? It's not a crime to say stand up for yourself. But if everybody stands up for themselves aggressively, then you end up in Egypt. And that is where we have to draw a line between helping to cause something, but being criminally liable for it. So yes, she definitely would have been in this list. Something of what she did encouraged her children to behave the way they did. But there was another turning point, which is they still, as adults, could have changed. Yeah. And Rabbeinu Bachya, as he often does, provides a wonderful little psychological summary.
In most instances, hatred is caused by jealousy. The hatred which the Torah had spoken of in verse 4 had been due to the brothers' awareness that their father loved Joseph more than he loved them. Why then did the Torah have to repeat here that the brothers were jealous?
Right, so if we already know that they're jealous because of their father's love, why does the Torah later on have to also repeat that they're jealous of him without giving us a particular ascription of what the jealousy is about? Right. The second, redundancies in the Torah are always new information. They're not just redundancies. It's not a human author.
You think it was an increase in jealousy?
Well, he's going to give his theory.
It is possible that the original hatred of the brothers toward Joseph clearly to their father showing him more love. There was actually no reason to be envious of a young boy of 17 years of age who had not demonstrated any qualities superior to those of his brothers. One usually envies one's peers or one's superiors. One is not given to envy inferiors. Now, after having heard repeatedly the kind of dreams their brother had experienced, his older brothers realized that there might be more to Joseph than they had thought before.
So why would their jealousy be piqued by the dreams?
They don't have them.
Well, they don't have them, which means there's something to him.
And it's inspired by God. So why is he getting these divine gifts?
And now he's suddenly in a different category, right? The arrogant little teenage brother, when we're all men with our families and our own flocks and doing our own things, who cares about him with his hair and all of that? I mean, I'm not jealous of him. It bugs me that dad seems to love him more, and it bugs me that dad seems to treat him differently. But really, there's not a competition. There's no competition. He's nothing, right? But when he starts exhibiting either godly traits or connection to God, or in other ways has these dreams that they begin to realize shows that there's a potential for him to really come out on top, that he's not really just the baby of the family that, dad likes, but he's an actual challenge to true leadership. Now I have to be jealous of him, right? Because now he has abilities that are superior to mine, and he has a status that will be superior to mine. and now I murder him.
And now God is
Right.
involved.
Which explains the great question of why didn't they murder him just with the coat, right? Why didn't they murder him just for the bad reports that happen? And those are not things that make you insecure in your status. But as soon as he begins to trot out these dreams, which is exactly what they say is the reason they're going to get rid of him, like let's kill the dreamer and see what happens to his dreams, that Rabbeinu Bachya is explaining is the trigger point, is that once they realize that he is truly a threat to their status and an equal or superior to them, now he has to be eliminated. No one needs to get rid of inferiors as competition, but you definitely have to get rid of your equals and
But
superiors.
they're clever enough not to repeat the whole Cain and Abel thing. They don't want to put themselves in the same place as Cain by God. So they
Yes.
figure out a way.
They find a loophole.
They find a loophole.
Yes, they do. Yes, well, we won't actually kill him. We'll just put him in a pit, and we'll let God take care of it.
Or sell them to slavery.
But that's my segue to move to the last line. The little line there in between, right? From what is stated to their discredit, we may infer something to their credit. The fact that they did not speak one thing with their mouth, having another quite different in their heart, we should at least praise them for that, right? Remember how it said they couldn't speak peace to them, to speak peace to him?
Right.
That's actually laudable.
Right.
Right.
They didn't pretend
They
to
didn't
like
pretend to be nice. They were always scowling. And that at least they were honest in their hatred. It's not a big thing. You don't get a big medal for that. But it is better than being two-faced. But I want to introduce the one thing in our few minutes that we're just about to go over, which is God. How much is God responsible for all of this? Again, not necessarily talking about criminality here, but talking about orchestration. Responsible for
sending the dreams.
Well, not for the dreams. Read even further back, all the way back to Abraham.
And he said to Abram, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years.
And for some reason, I seem to quote the same thing twice.
Okay.
Just skip the second one.
Skip the second one. Now, do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you.
Right. So that middle verse was actually trying to refer to Abraham's concern of what about the future? What about my family? What about my progeny? And God reassures him in many ways, but one of his reassurances is your kids are going to be oppressed in a land not their own. Well, that's what happens here. Right? God knew that we were going to end up oppressed. So how can we blame these folks? Right? Weren't they just fulfilling God's plan? And indeed, the last line here is Joseph himself. When his brothers say, don't be upset, like don't be afraid that I'm going to take revenge, because God sent me here, not you. Right? God sent me to Egypt. And that's how he finds it in his heart to forgive his brothers. This was all part of God's plan to make things work out for the best. He doesn't really have the whole oppressed thing going right now, but he believes that the brothers were just a tool for getting him to Egypt, which is going to save the family.
But by that point, both Joseph and his brothers had suffered. Joseph suffers immediately
Yes.
in these immediate years.
Right.
And then the brothers end up suffering later in famine, in humiliation, and poverty. And reconciles. They can have that reconciling.
The accounts are square.
Yeah, there can be a reconciling at that point. And a level of honesty.
Well, the one thing I'd like you to leave with is an idea, however, that as much as God may have predicted that this is indeed what would happen, God's prediction was not ordaining the actions of the participants. It was God simply witnessing, because God can see all of time and space simultaneously, what did happen from God's point of view. It's not, remember, God doesn't see the future. God sees the eternal present that God is always in. The descendants doing this, but the descendants are still choosing to do this differently. God would have spoken differently to Abram, and he would not have had to say your kids will end up being strangers in a strange land. So as much as we may want to think that God is the mastermind behind all of this, no, God is simply revealing to Abram that this is going to happen because of their choices, but that they will come out the other end in order that they can have hope while they're there, because that hope will be essential for them coming out the other end when they finally listen to Moses. So God is definitely setting the stage, but the actors are ad-libbing. They are improvising, and God has simply seen the full play to know what they're going to do, the drama that will unfold, and the consequences. But ultimately, any one of them, and the mothers as well, although they're not in this particular chapter, behaved differently, could have changed it, and could have spared us from the Egyptian slavery. And that means that for each of us, we have the power to actually change the drama. Right? We are not just writing or reading a script. We are writing the script, writing therefore our present and our future. So be careful. And don't always think it was someone else's fault.